Okay, so here's the question. Who would you rather have a beer with? Fitzwilliam Darcy, the male hero of, or star, or whatever you would call it, of Pride and Prejudice, or Edward Rochester, who's the same kind of thing, but in Jane Eyre? Think about it. Who would you rather have a beer with? Now, I've already previously reviewed Pride and Prejudice, and I think I've got a video on it. If I do, I'll post it at the back of this. But I haven't reviewed Jane Eyre, so let me give you the real Cliff Notes version of Jane Eyre. It's kind of a, I'd call it a tearjerker, except that you're going to find it as treated as a classic of English literature. What you got, Jane Eyre, this central character in that thing. She's an orphan. She's raised by a really evil aunt, and she goes to a really cruel and miserable school when she's about 10 years old. 8 years later, she manages to get out of this school, and she goes to work as a governess in a place called Thornfield Hall. Now, Thornfield Hall is this big estate that's owned by this guy Rochester. And what happens is there are a whole bunch of twists and turns, major plot developments, but they ultimately fall in love with one another, and at the end of the book, they kind of sort of live happily ever after. So anyway, that's the basic story of Jane Eyre. Now let's take a look at this guy Rochester. Well, first off, he is a big-time talker. Not what I'd call a kind of not a feature that you'd associate with a regular guy, but he does talk about his past. He does talk about his feelings. He's pretty open about all that stuff. Little problem, he's open about everything except for the nutty wife that he's got locked up in the attic. That ultimately comes to light, and ultimately that's resolved at the end of the book. So, you could sum up Edward Rochester this way. He's I hate to use the term, but he's kind of an asshole, especially when he flirts with this gal named Blanche, in order to make Jane Eyre jealous. Now, on the other hand, his major good feature is that he's really indifferent to class distinctions and things like that. So even though he's this big shot landowner, he doesn't care that he's fallen in love with somebody everybody else looks down on, a governess. Now, if you look at Darcy in Pride and Prejudice, first off, you got to understand his first name is Fitzwilliam, which kind of, sort of sums him up all at once. He's very reserved. He's very aloof. He's a deep thinker, I guess, or a deep feeler. Ultimately, he and Jane Eyre fall in love with one another. Not Jane Eyre, Elizabeth Bennet, the lady star of Pride and Prejudice, fall in love with one another. Now, Rochester, Darcy, they got a number of similar characteristics. First off, as I pointed out, they're both arrogant. Both a little bit aloof, maybe Darcy a little bit more so. They're both rich. They both like independent-minded, strong-willed women, and that's what Jane Eyre is, and that's certainly what Elizabeth Bennet is in Pride and Prejudice. And they both end up getting a girl. And as a matter of fact, along the way, in terms of getting a girl, they have to beat out a vicar, a clergyman, to do it. Now, what's different about them? Well, first off, Rochester in his past, he did something really spectacular. He married this, I guess you'd call her a nymphomaniac, who he's hiding up in the attic and he's concealing from Jane Eyre and everybody else, which is certainly a little bit on the odd side. But on the other hand, he looks like a guy who likes to have a good time. He's certain, in that regard, he'd certainly be my kind of guy. Fitzwilliam Darcy, in my opinion, is really a cold fish, a dud. I know he's rich, and I know he's really smart, and I know Elizabeth Bennet finally falls in love with him. But he's certainly not my cup of tea. Rochester, I think, comes closer to it. So now, who would you rather have a beer with? Well, as you can tell, my opinion, I would rather have a beer with Rochester than Darcy. But who would you rather have a beer with? I mean, now, if you open up the universe to everything, I'd probably say, well, Arnold Schwarzenegger or Sylvester Stallone or something like that. But if you got to pick just between Rochester and Darcy, who would you pick? My pick goes with Rochester. How about you? See you next week.